Millionaire arrives unannounced, sees the nanny with his children, and falls in love with what he witnesses. He thought love was luxury, but a single moment in the garden shattered everything he believed. The woman he had hired to care for the children had done more for them than he ever had. And in that instant, he knew he was facing the only person capable of healing an entire family, including his own. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The sun was setting over the meticulously manicured gardens of the Alistair mansion in the elegant Upper East Side neighborhood of New York City. The French windows reflected the last golden rays, while the interior remained plunged into a deafening silence that seemed to swallow any trace of joy. Richard Alistair, 42, watched the city from his top-floor office. His laptop, still open, displayed ascending charts that proved yet another quarter of record profits for his technology company. His eyes, however, showed no satisfaction. There was a distance in them, as if he was always looking somewhere beyond the horizon. A soft knock on the door brought him back to reality. "Come in," he ordered, without turning around. Helen, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for over 15 years, hesitated at the entrance. "Sir, the new nanny has arrived. Miss Claire Oliver." Richard nodded emotionlessly. "Follow the usual integration process, Helen. Show her the house, explain the rules, introduce her to the children. I'm busy right now." "But sir, this is already the 8th nanny in 2 years. Perhaps it would be important for you to meet her personally and—" "Is she qualified, isn't she? Was the resume approved by the agency?" "Yes, but—" "Then I see no need to interrupt my work." His voice showed no irritation, just a calculated coolness. The result of years of practicing the art of keeping people at a distance. Helen left, closing the door softly. Richard turned his attention back to the window, but his thoughts were no longer on business. For a moment he allowed himself to remember. To remember Lucy. The days when the mansion was not just a physical space but a home. 5 years had passed since she left, leaving him with 3 children he barely knew, and a constant sense of failure that no professional success could erase. Downstairs, Claire Oliver followed Helen through the opulent corridors of the Alistair mansion. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor as she observed, with discreet astonishment, the luxury that surrounded her. Coming from Savannah, a city in Georgia, Claire had never imagined working in a place like this. "This will be your room," Helen indicated, opening a door. "It's adjacent to the children's room, so you can attend to them during the night if necessary." The room, though the simplest Claire had seen so far in the mansion, was still larger than the entire apartment where she had left her sick mother in the care of her younger sister. "Thank you," Claire replied, placing her single suitcase on the bed. "When can I meet the children?" Helen hesitated, her wrinkled face showing concern. "About that I need to warn you. Mr. Alistair's children are challenging. William is 12, Marina 9, and Henry 6. Since their mother left, they have been difficult. Especially for the nannies." Claire nodded, serious. "I understand. Her children build high walls, and they know how to push people away," Helen completed with a sigh. "The last nanny only lasted 3 weeks. What happened to their mother?" Claire asked as she arranged her few clothes in the spacious closet. "Mrs. Lucy," Helen lowered her voice. "She met another man, an entrepreneur like Mr. Richard, but international. She moved to Europe. At first she called the children every week, then monthly, now rarely." Claire felt her heart clench. She wasn't one to judge anyone, but she couldn't imagine how someone could leave 3 children behind. "The children are in the backyard now," Helen informed. "Do you want to meet them?" Claire took a deep breath, adjusted her simple uniform, a white blouse and black pants she had bought especially for this opportunity, and nodded. "Yes, let's go." The backyard was spacious, with a small play area rarely used. Claire immediately spotted the 3 siblings, each isolated in their own world. William, the eldest, sat under a tree with headphones and a defiant look. Marina swung slowly on a swing, her face expressionless and distant. Little Henry played alone in the sand, building and destroying castles with mechanical gestures. Claire approached slowly, followed by Helen. "Children," the housekeeper called. "Come and meet Miss Claire, your new nanny." None of the 3 moved or showed any interest. "You can leave me alone with them," Claire gently asked Helen, The housekeeper seemed to hesitate, but eventually agreed and returned to the house. Claire walked to the center of the garden and simply sat on the grass. She said nothing, made no attempt to approach them. She just waited. After a few minutes, she felt a gaze on her. It was Henry, the youngest, watching her with curiosity. "Hi," she said softly. The boy didn't answer, but also didn't look away. "That castle of yours is looking nice," Claire commented, pointing to the sand structure. "It needs a flag on top, don't you think?" Henry shrugged, returning his attention to the sand. Claire picked up a small fallen twig and a leaf. Carefully, she made a hole in the leaf and inserted the twig. She approached cautiously and offered the small improvised flag to the boy. "Every castle needs a flag to show who the king is." Henry looked suspiciously at the simple object in her hands, but eventually took it and, with hesitation, planted it on top of his sandcastle. At that moment, Marina got up from the swing and approached, keeping her distance but visibly curious. Her deep brown eyes, like her younger brother's, examined Claire with a mix of distrust and interest. "You'll leave too," the girl said suddenly, her voice carrying a sad certainty beyond her age. "Everyone always leaves." Claire felt the weight of those words. "I'm here now," she simply replied. "And I love stories." "Do you like stories, Marina?" The girl didn't answer, but her gaze softened slightly. William, who until then pretended to ignore the scene, took off one of his headphones. "How many nannies do you think have been through this house?" he asked defiantly. "Do you know why none of them stay?" Claire met the boy's gaze. "I don't know." "Why don't you tell me?" "Because they can't handle it," he replied with a cold smile. "My dad thinks he can buy people to pretend they care about us." "No one can buy that," Claire agreed. "True care is priceless." Something in the sincerity of her answer seemed to surprise the boy, who quickly put his headphone back on and returned to his indifferent posture. As the sky began to darken, Claire calmly stood up. "It's getting late. Shall we go in for dinner?" "We don't have dinner together," Marina informed. "Dad is almost never home. We eat in the kitchen with Helen." Claire nodded, feeling the weight of the loneliness that hung over those children. "Well then, let's go to the kitchen. I'm curious to get to know the house better." To her surprise, Henry approached and shyly held her hand. Marina followed a few steps behind, and William, after a few moments of resistance, stood up and followed the group at a distance. As they walked into the luxurious mansion, Claire knew there was a long road ahead. Those children carried deep wounds, and distrust was their form of protection. But in that small gesture from Henry, in Marina's curious gaze, and even in William's resistance, there was a spark of hope. And Claire was determined to turn that spark into light. The first week at the Allister mansion was a true test for Claire. The children alternated between moments of cautious curiosity and complete rejection. On the third night, she woke to the sound of crying coming from the next room. She found Henry curled up in his bed, trembling after a nightmare. "It's okay, I'm here," she whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I want Mommy," the boy murmured between sobs. Claire felt her heart clench. "I know you miss her," she replied softly, resisting the urge to promise things she couldn't fulfill. She then noticed Marina watching from the doorway, her eyes shining in the darkness. "You can't sleep either?" Claire asked. The girl gave a shrug. "Henry has nightmares almost every night. And you take care of him?" "Someone has to," Marina replied with a maturity that didn't match her 9 years. At that moment, Claire made a decision. "You sleep in separate rooms, don't you? Why don't we put the beds together?" Marina's eyes widened in surprise. "We can do that?" "Why not? Families should stay together. With Marina's help and," to her surprise, William's, who appeared silently after hearing the commotion, Claire rearranged the furniture in the children's main bedroom, joining the 3 beds. "What will Dad say?" Henry asked, his eyes still red from crying. "We'll explain that it's better this way," Claire replied with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. She knew she was risking her job, but something told her those children needed connection more than rules. That night, the 3 siblings slept together for the first time in years. Claire watched them from the doorway until they fell completely asleep, noting how William, even pretending indifference, positioned himself protectively close to his younger siblings. The next morning, contrary to what she expected, there were no reprimands. Richard Allister had left before dawn for a business trip to Washington, D.C. Something common, according to Helen. He spends more time traveling than at home, the housekeeper explained, while preparing breakfast. The children barely see him. Claire observed the three siblings sitting at the kitchen table. There was something different about them this morning. A slight relaxation in their usually tense expressions, especially in Henry, who was eating his cereal with more enthusiasm than on previous days. "Helen," Claire asked while helping to serve juice, "is there any space in the garden that isn't used much? Some forgotten corner?" The housekeeper thought for a moment. "Well, there's an area in the back, near the wall, that has been abandoned since Mrs. Lucy left. It's where she used to grow some plants. No one has been there for years." Claire's eyes lit up. "Can I see that place after breakfast?" After breakfast, while the children finished their school lessons under the supervision of a private tutor who came 3 times a week, Claire followed Helen to the back of the property. The space the housekeeper showed her was a small garden surrounded by a weathered wooden trellis. Weeds grew among the few shrubs that had survived the abandonment. A stone bench, partially covered by climbing plants, remained in the center. "It's perfect," Claire murmured. "Perfect. It's abandoned," Helen commented in surprise. "But it has potential," Claire replied, already visualizing what she could do with that space. "Helen, do you think Mr. Allister would mind if the children and I worked here?" The housekeeper hesitated. "Well, no one comes here." I doubt he'd notice any difference. That afternoon, after lessons, Claire invited the 3 siblings to see the forgotten garden. "What's so special about here?" William asked, looking with disdain at the abandoned space. "Nothing yet," Claire answered sincerely. "But it could be. It could be our secret place." "Secret?" Henry's eyes sparkled with interest. "Yes, a place just for us, where we can create something beautiful together." Marina observed the space with critical eyes. "Mommy used to come here," she said softly. "She planted flowers." Claire smiled. "Then maybe we should continue what she started. What do you think?" To her surprise, it was William who first bent down to pull a weed. "If we're going to do this, let's do it right," he murmured, avoiding her gaze. In the following days, always after lessons and other obligations, the 4 worked in the garden. Claire managed to get some seeds and flower seedlings from Helen, who increasingly supported the initiative. The children, initially skeptical, gradually became involved in the project. Henry loved watering the plants and looking for small insects among the leaves. Marina, meticulous and organized, planned where each flower should be planted to create harmonious color combinations. And William, though he tried to maintain his facade of indifference, proved skillful in building small support structures for climbing plants. One afternoon, while resting on the now clean stone bench, Claire noticed Marina watching a butterfly that had landed on one of the first flowers they had bloomed. "Do you know what butterflies teach us?" Claire asked. Marina looked at her with curiosity. "What?" "That sometimes we need to go through difficult transformations to become more beautiful and free." The girl reflected on that for a few moments. "Like the caterpillar in the cocoon?" "Exactly. Sometimes life puts us in dark places, but that doesn't mean we'll stay there forever." At that moment, William, who had been pretending not to pay attention, approached. "Our mom isn't coming back, you know," he said abruptly. "So there's no point in creating false hopes." Claire looked him in the eyes. "I'm not talking about your mother, William. I'm talking about you, about how people can change, grow, find new ways to be happy." The boy looked away but remained nearby, a small victory Claire silently celebrated. At night, Claire started a new ritual with the children. Before going to sleep, they would sit together on the joined beds and share a moment of gratitude. "You don't have to be grateful for grand things," she explained. "It can be something small that happened today. Something you noticed, something you felt." Initially, only Henry participated enthusiastically, thanking for things like the bluebird I saw in the garden or the pudding Helen made for lunch. Marina eventually began to contribute with more thoughtful thanks, such as the book I'm reading or the smell of the flowers we planted. William remained silent, observing. Until one night, after 3 weeks of living together, he spoke for the first time. "I'm grateful I can sleep without hearing Henry crying." Claire suppressed her emotion, realizing the meaning of those words. It wasn't just about peaceful sleep. It was an acknowledgement that something was changing in that house. The next morning, Helen sought out Claire while the children were having breakfast. "I received a call from Mr. Alistair," she informed in a low voice. "He was checking how everything was and—" The housekeeper hesitated, a slight smile forming on her wrinkled lips. "He said the private tutor commented on changes in the children's behavior, especially William, who has been participating more in classes." Claire nodded, trying not to show too much pride. "They are incredible children. They just need to feel safe to show it." Mr. Alistair was intrigued. He said he would return earlier than expected to see for himself what was happening. The news took Claire by surprise. In almost a month working at the Alistair mansion, she still hadn't had significant contact with Richard. Their brief interactions were limited to nods when he occasionally arrived late at night or left early in the morning. "When is he arriving?" she asked, feeling a sudden apprehension. "Tomorrow afternoon," Helen replied. "And it seems he intends to stay for a few days." That night, while the children slept, Claire sat alone on the bench in the secret garden they had created. In the moonlight, the newly planted flowers seemed almost ethereal. A gentle breeze swayed the branches of nearby trees, creating a dance of shadows on the ground. Claire closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of reflection. In such a short time, those children had conquered a space in her heart that she didn't know existed. Every small victory, a smile from Marina, a curious question from Henry, a less hostile glance from William, meant more to her than she could express. But what about the father? What would Richard Alistair be like beyond the distant figure she knew? And how would he react to the changes she had implemented in his children's routine? Claire took a deep breath, smelling the soft scent of the garden's first flowers. Whatever Richard's reaction, she was determined to defend the progress the children had made. Not for her job, but for the well-being of those three hearts that were slowly beginning to open up to the world again. With that resolution, she stood up and walked back to the mansion, where three children slept peacefully in their joined beds, unaware of the storm of emotions that might be coming with the return of their absent father. The New York City sky dawned cloudy that Friday. Claire woke earlier than usual, a restlessness settling in her chest since the news of Richard Alistair's early return. She prepared with extra care, choosing her most presentable uniform, and made sure everything in the children's area was impeccable. "You look nervous," Helen commented while preparing breakfast. "You don't need to be. Mr. Richard isn't a monster, he's just distant." "I'm not nervous," Claire lied, helping to arrange the bread in the basket. "I just want to make sure everything is perfect." Helen smiled knowingly. "The children are different with you." "He'll notice it. Trust me." The hours passed with agonizing slowness. The children, sensing Claire's tension, behaved exceptionally well during their morning lessons. Even William seemed determined not to cause trouble. "Dad's coming today, isn't he?" Marina asked during lunch, distractedly stirring her food. "Yes," Claire confirmed. "Helen said he should arrive in the mid-afternoon." "He always brings presents," Henry commented with restrained excitement. "Last time he brought me a new video game." Claire noticed how the boy tried to sound excited, but his eyes revealed a sadness that expensive gifts couldn't erase. "Presents are nice," she replied carefully. "But you know what's even better? Time together. Maybe we can show your dad the secret garden." William let out a bitter laugh. "He won't care about the garden. He probably won't even notice it exists." Claire didn't argue, but made a mental note to find a way to involve Richard in the activities that had become so important to his children. After lunch, while the children rested, Claire decided to make one last visit to the secret garden. To her surprise, she found Marina already there, sitting on the stone bench contemplating the flowers. "Is everything okay?" Claire asked, sitting next to the girl. Marina took a while to answer, her eyes fixed on the small daisies they had planted together. "When my mom left," she began softly, "Dad said she needed to find her own happiness, that sometimes adults have to make difficult choices." Claire listened carefully, sensing this was an important moment. "I was 7, Marina continued. "I didn't understand how her happiness could mean leaving us. And then, Dad also left. Your father didn't leave physically, but emotionally," Claire gently completed. Marina nodded. "He's always here, but he's never really here, you know. And I'm afraid—" "Afraid of what, dear?" "Afraid you'll also leave when you find out we're not easy to love." The words hit Claire like a physical blow. She took a deep breath, controlling the emotion that threatened to overflow. "Marina, look at me," she asked, gently holding the girl's chin so their eyes would meet. "You three are extraordinarily easy to love. It's the adult world that sometimes complicates everything." The conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of tires at the mansion's entrance. Marina immediately stood up. "It's Dad's car," she said, a mix of anxiety and hope in her voice. Claire felt her heart race, but maintained her composure. "Let's go then. Let's greet him together." When they reached the main entrance, Helen was already receiving Richard Allister. Tall, elegantly built, with dark hair slightly graying at the temples, he looked like the perfect image of a successful businessman. He wore an impeccably tailored suit that Claire imagined cost more than several months of her salary. "Marina," he said, spotting his daughter, a restrained smile on his face. "How grown you've become." The girl approached shyly, accepting the quick hug her father offered. Her eyes sought Claire as if asking for support. It was then that Richard noticed Claire's presence for the first time. His eyes, an intense brown like his children's, analyzed her with curiosity. "You must be the new nanny," he said, extending his hand. "Helen told me about you." "Claire, correct?" "Claire Oliver, sir," she replied, briefly shaking the offered hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Something in her tone, perhaps the subtle emphasis on "finally," made Richard frown slightly, but the moment was interrupted by the noisy arrival of Henry, who ran downstairs. "Dad!" "You're back," the boy exclaimed, throwing himself into his arms with an enthusiasm that took Richard by surprise. "Hey, champ," he replied, visibly uncomfortable with the effusive display of affection. "I brought you something from Washington, D.C." Claire observed how Richard quickly turned the emotional moment into something transactional, diverting his son's attention to a small box he pulled from the inside pocket of his jacket. "A collector's plane," he explained as Henry opened the gift. "It's a miniature of the Embraer jet I used on the trip." "Thank you, Dad." Henry thanked, though Claire could perceive a slight decrease in his initial enthusiasm. "Do you want to see what we planted in the garden? We have flowers and even strawberries starting to grow." Richard cast a confused look at Helen. "The garden in the back," the housekeeper explained. "The children and Claire have been working there for the past few weeks." "Perhaps later, son," Richard replied, checking his watch. "I need to check some urgent emails first." The sparkle in Henry's eyes visibly dimmed. Claire felt a pang in her chest, seeing the disappointment on the boy's face, but she remained silent. It wasn't her place to interfere in this first reunion. "Where's William?" Richard asked, noticing his eldest son's absence. "In his room," Marina replied. "He knew you were coming, but—" "I understand," Richard said with resignation. "I'll talk to him later. Now, if you'll excuse me." And with that, he headed to his office, leaving an uncomfortable silence behind. "He's busy," Helen justified automatically, a speech Claire suspected had been repeated for years. "Let's prepare a special snack for you while he works a bit. How about that?" Claire followed the children and Helen to the kitchen, her heart heavy. The brief encounter confirmed everything she suspected about the family dynamic. Richard Allister was not a cruel man. He seemed genuinely affectionate in his distant way, but he had built such a high wall between himself and his children that he didn't even know how to cross it. For the rest of the afternoon, Claire kept the children busy, taking them to the secret garden for an extra session of plant care. She noticed that Henry was quieter than usual, keeping the new toy plane in his pocket without the usual enthusiasm for gifts. When the sky began to darken, announcing the end of the afternoon, Claire led the children back into the house for dinner. To her surprise, Richard was in the kitchen talking to Helen, and the private tutor mentioned significant improvements, especially in William, the housekeeper was saying. He even participated in a school project voluntarily, something that never happened before. Richard nodded thoughtfully, then noticed the group's arrival. His eyes lingered briefly on Claire. "Miss Oliver, Helen was telling me about the changes you've implemented. It seems my children are responding well to your approach." "They are wonderful children, Mr. Allister," Claire replied sincerely. "They just needed someone who was willing to truly listen to them." Something in her direct tone seemed to surprise him again, but he merely nodded. "Dinner will be served shortly," Helen informed. "Would you like to have dinner with the children today, sir? I've prepared your favorite dish, light feijoada, just as you like it." Claire noticed the sudden tension in the children. Clearly, dinners with their father were not common occurrences. Actually, Richard replied after a brief hesitation, yes, I will have dinner with the children today. I have a few weeks of stories to make up for, don't I? Dinner was initially uncomfortable, with forced conversations and long silences. Richard asked generic questions about school and activities, to which the children replied with short phrases. Claire remained in the background, assisting Helen with serving but carefully observing the dynamic. It was Henry who finally broke the tension. "Dad, did you know we have a secret garden now?" Richard put down his fork and looked at his son with genuine curiosity. "A secret garden? Like in the book?" "What book?" Henry asked, confused. "The Secret Garden, a classic of literature," Richard explained, surprising Claire with this glimpse of a man who apparently appreciated children's literature. "It was one of your mother's favorites." A heavy silence fell over the table at the mention of Lucy, but Marina bravely broke it. "Claire helped us bring Mum's garden back," she said. "The one in the back of the property near the wall. We planted flowers and some vegetables. Henry even built a birdhouse. With William's help," Henry quickly added, looking at his older brother who kept his eyes fixed on his plate. Richard seemed genuinely surprised. "I didn't know you were interested in gardening." "There's a lot you don't know about us, Dad," William said suddenly, speaking for the first time during dinner. There was no aggression in his voice, just a sad realization. Claire held her breath, fearing the moment might escalate into a confrontation, but Richard simply nodded. "You're right. William," he admitted, surprising everyone. "There's a lot I don't know about you three. Perhaps it's time to change that." "How?" William challenged, distrust evident in his voice. Richard thought for a moment. "Could we start with you showing me this secret garden tomorrow? If it's not too precious a secret to share with me, of course." Claire watched as the eyes of the three children lit up with varying degrees of hope and skepticism. It was a small beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. After dinner, while Helen and Claire organized the kitchen, Richard approached. "Miss Oliver, I'd like to speak with you in my office when you're done here." Claire nodded, feeling an unexpected wave of nervousness. "Of course, sir. I'll be there in a few minutes." When she finished her tasks and went up to Richard's office, she found him looking out the same window where she had first seen him on the day of her arrival. His posture was the same, upright, dignified, slightly tense, but there was something different in his expression. "You're doing a remarkable job with my children," he said without preamble, turning to face her. "I confess I'm impressed. None of the previous nannies managed to establish such a strong connection with them." "Thank you, sir. But the credit is theirs," Claire replied. "They are incredible children who just needed space to express their feelings." Richard walked to his desk, leaning slightly against it. "I noticed the joined beds in their room. Was that your idea?" Claire felt a slight pang of apprehension. "Yes, sir. Henry was having frequent nightmares, and I realized the siblings felt safer together. I hope it wasn't too serious a transgression of house rules." To her surprise, Richard smiled slightly. "Rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. If it's working for them, I see no problem." There was a moment of comfortable silence between them, something Claire didn't expect. "Helen mentioned you came from Georgia," Richard commented finally. "From Savannah, yes. My mother is ill, heart problems, and needs continuous treatment. My younger sister takes care of her while I work here in New York City." "I understand," Richard said thoughtfully. "It must be difficult to be away from her." The observation, laden with genuine empathy, caught Claire off guard. "It is, yes, but we do what's necessary for the people we love, don't we?" Richard nodded, a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. For a brief moment, Claire had the impression that he wanted to say something more, something personal, but the moment passed. "Well," he said, straightening up, "I have a proposal for you. I'm considering postponing my next business trips to spend more time with my children. It would be helpful if you could guide me on how to reconnect with them." Claire couldn't hide her surprise. "Me guide you? You accomplished in weeks what I couldn't in years," he explained with disarming frankness. "Clearly I'm doing something wrong, and I'm not ashamed to ask for help when it's for the good of my children." The vulnerability of that admission touched Claire deeply. This was not the cold and distant man she had imagined, but someone who, despite his flaws, loved his children and wanted to do better. "It would be an honor, Mr. Alistair," she replied sincerely. "And the first step is simple. Just be present. Not just physically, but emotionally. Listen to them, even when it seems trivial. Especially when it seems trivial." Richard nodded slowly, absorbing the advice. "Thank you, Claire," he said, using her first name for the first time. I'll see you tomorrow in the secret garden." As she walked back to her room that night, Claire felt a strange mix of hope and apprehension. Something was changing in the Alistair mansion, something significant, and she was at the center of that transformation. What she didn't expect was the way her heart had raced when Richard said her name, or how she had noticed his subtle scent when they were close in his office. These were dangerous reactions she would need to carefully control. After all, she was there to help the children. Any other complication would be just that, a complication neither of them needed. The following weeks brought a gradual transformation to the Alistair mansion. Richard, true to his promise, cancelled 2 important business trips and began working more from home. At first, his efforts were visibly clumsy. He didn't know how to talk to his children without sounding formal, or how to participate in their games without seeming embarrassed. Claire observed discreetly, offering guidance when asked, but giving space for father and children to build their own dynamic. Her presence became a kind of bridge between 2 worlds that had long drifted apart. "Do you think I'm making progress?" Richard asked one evening, as they both watched the children playing in the garden after dinner. Claire smiled. "Did you see Henry's face when you helped him build that new birdhouse? Or how Marina showed her school drawing to you first, not to me? They are small moments, Mr. Alistair, but significant." "Richard," he corrected softly, "after all you've done for my family, I think we can drop the formalities when we're alone." Claire felt a slight blush creep up her neck, but nodded. "Richard, then." The silence that followed was comfortable, contemplative. Twilight tinged the sky with orange hues, creating a golden light that bathed the garden and the children playing. "Why did you choose this job?" Richard asked suddenly. "Taking care of other people's children?" Claire pondered for a moment. "I think I've always had an easy time understanding children. They're honest, you know? They don't hide who they really are. If they're sad, they cry. If they're happy, they smile. Adults lose that along the way, including me," Richard commented with a melancholic smile. "Especially those who carry a lot of weight on their shoulders," Claire replied, meeting his gaze briefly before returning to observe the children. At that moment, Helen appeared at the terrace door. "Mr. Richard, your mother just arrived. She's in the living room." Richard straightened up immediately, his face taking on a more formal expression. "My mother, she didn't say she was coming. She said she wanted to surprise you," Helen explained, looking slightly uncomfortable. Claire noticed the instant change in atmosphere. Mrs. Beatrice Alistair's visits were rare, but always left Richard tense for days. "Come on." "Children," Claire called, approaching the trio playing. "It's getting late and we have a special visitor. Let's get ready to greet your grandmother." The children's faces did not show the excitement that would normally accompany the announcement of a grandmother's visit. Henry seemed apprehensive, Marina resigned, and William immediately adopted a closed expression. "Do we have to?" William murmured. "Yes," Richard replied, approaching and placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "But I'll be with you the whole time. I promise." The brief look of surprise and relief on William's face did not go unnoticed by Claire. Mrs. Beatrice Alistair was the personification of traditional elegance. At 70, she maintained an upright posture, impeccably dyed brown hair styled in a sophisticated bun, and dressed like a high society lady of New York City. Her eyes, the same brown shade as her sons' and grandchildren's, were sharp and evaluative. "Mother," Richard greeted, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "What a pleasant surprise." "I thought it was time to check how things are going," she replied, her gaze sweeping the room and settling on the children who approached shyly. "My little grandchildren. How grown they are." The children greeted their grandmother politely but without enthusiasm. Claire discreetly kept her distance, waiting for the appropriate moment to withdraw and leave the family in privacy. It was then that Mrs. Beatrice's gaze fell upon her. "And who might this young woman be?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "This is Claire Oliver, Mother." "The children's new nanny," Richard introduced. "Claire, this is my mother, Mrs. Beatrice Alistair." Claire approached respectfully. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am." Mrs. Beatrice examined her from head to toe with a calculating look. "Southern?" she asked directly. "From Savannah, Georgia," Claire confirmed, maintaining a polite tone despite the abruptness of the question. Was Mrs. Beatrice's only reply before turning her attention back to her son. "Richard, we need to discuss the preparations for next month's charity event. The foundation is counting on the Alistair family's participation." Claire recognized the cue to withdraw. "If you'll excuse me, I'll prepare the children for their bath." "No need, Claire," Richard interrupted, surprising both her and his mother. "Helen can take care of that today. I'd like you to participate in the conversation about the event. The children could present something, don't you think? You've been working with them on creative activities that might be suitable." Claire hesitated, noticing Mrs. Beatrice's ill-concealed look of disapproval. "Of course, if you prefer, sir." What followed was an hour of discussion about the Alistair Foundation's charity event, dedicated to educational causes. Claire contributed punctually when asked, suggesting a musical performance by the children, as they had practiced some songs together in recent weeks. Mrs. Beatrice listened with an impassive expression, occasionally casting evaluative glances at Claire, as if trying to decipher a particularly intriguing enigma. When the children were finally taken upstairs by Helen, Mrs. Beatrice wasted no time. "Richard, would you accompany me to the terrace? I'd like to smoke a cigarette." Richard nodded, casting an apologetic look at Claire before following his mother. On the terrace, while lighting a thin cigarette with precise movements, Mrs. Beatrice was direct. "What's going on in this house, Richard? Since when does the nanny participate in family discussions?" Richard sighed. "Claire isn't just a nanny, Mother. She has completely transformed the children's lives." "And apparently yours too," Mrs. Beatrice observed acidly. "I'm not blind, son. I see how you look at her." "I don't know what you're talking about." Richard defended himself, though a slight blush betrayed him. "Yes, you do," Mrs. Beatrice insisted, exhaling a long puff of smoke. "You've always been a terrible liar ever since you were a child. Are you getting involved with the nanny, Richard? Is that what you want for your life? For your reputation?" "My reputation," he repeated with a touch of bitterness. "That's always what mattered to you, wasn't it? Appearances, what others will think, what they'll say at your charity teas." Mrs. Beatrice narrowed her eyes. "Don't be naive. This family has built a legacy over generations. Your father didn't work his whole life to see the Alistair name associated with scandals." "What scandal, Mother?" "Claire is an extraordinary woman who managed to do what neither I nor you nor the best psychologists I hired could. She reached my children. You should be grateful to her." "Grateful?" Mrs. Beatrice almost laughed. "She's an employee, Richard. She's being paid to do her job. And apparently she's doing more than she should." Richard took a deep breath, controlling his rising irritation. "Claire has never overstepped professional boundaries. The problem is yours, not hers." "My problem, son, is that I know this world better than you do," Mrs. Beatrice retorted, extinguishing her cigarette precisely in the crystal ashtray. "Girls like her see men like you and see opportunity. It's natural. It's a survival instinct. I don't blame her. I blame you for being naive." "I think this conversation has come to an end," Richard declared, turning to leave. "Just one more thing," Mrs. Beatrice said, her voice now calculatingly soft. "I'll be staying for a few days. I want to get to know this Claire better." Richard hesitated, but nodded stiffly before returning inside the house. Meanwhile, Claire had gone upstairs to assist Helen with the children, feeling uncomfortable after Richard and his mother had left for what was obviously a conversation about her. "Don't worry about Mrs. Beatrice," Helen commented while helping Henry brush his teeth. "She's like that with everyone." "She doesn't like me," Claire replied simply. "She doesn't like anyone who threatens what she considers the natural order of things," Helen explained. "And you, my dear, have definitely messed up the order of this house. For the better, I might add." Claire smiled gratefully, but the concern persisted. She knew her position in the Alistair mansion could be compromised now that Mrs. Beatrice was watching. In the following days, Claire felt constantly under scrutiny. Mrs. Beatrice would unexpectedly appear during activities with the children, ask questions about her family and background, and occasionally make subtly depreciating comments about the cultural differences between the South and New York City. Richard tried to intervene when he could, But his own interactions with Claire became more formal and distant in his mother's presence. The children noticed the change and reacted with regressive behaviors. Henry started having nightmares again, Marina became more withdrawn, and William resumed his hostile posture. One afternoon, while the children were at their swimming lesson in the mansion's pool with their instructor, Claire was surprised by Mrs. Beatrice in the library. "Miss Oliver," the lady called with a chilling formality, "would you accompany me to the office? There's something I'd like to discuss." Claire followed her with apprehension. In the office, Mrs. Beatrice closed the door and went straight to the point. "I'll be frank with you, Claire. I can call you Claire, can't I? I see how my son looks at you, and how you look back at him. I'm not foolish." Claire maintained her composure, though she felt her face flush. "With all due respect, ma'am, my relationship with Mr. Richard is strictly professional." "Perhaps now," Mrs. Beatrice conceded, sitting elegantly in the chair behind the desk. "But we both know things are changing. And I want to avoid unnecessary suffering for everyone involved." She opened a drawer and took out an envelope. "I've observed your work with the children. It's impressive, I must admit. You have a natural gift, but I've also seen how this is affecting the dynamic of this family." Richard is confused, mixing gratitude with other feelings. Mrs. Beatrice slid the envelope across the desk. "This is a check for a considerable amount. Enough for you to go back to Savannah, buy a nice house for your family, pay for the best doctors for your mother, and perhaps even start your own business. All I ask in return is that you step away. No drama, no scenes. Just say you received an urgent call from your family and need to leave." Claire looked at the envelope as if it were a poisonous snake. "Are you offering me money to leave?" "I'm offering a dignified exit before things get complicated," Mrs. Beatrice corrected. "Think about your family, your sick mother, the future you could provide for them with this money." Claire took a deep breath, trying to control the indignation that grew within her. "And the children? Have you thought about what my sudden departure would cause them? After so many losses and abandonments?" "They'll survive," Mrs. Beatrice replied coldly. "Children are resilient, and Richard can hire another nanny, perhaps someone more suitable for the family's circumstances." "Someone from your social class, you mean?" Claire completed with a calm she didn't feel. Mrs. Beatrice tilted her head slightly, as if conceding the point. "Someone who understands boundaries, who doesn't create unrealistic expectations." Claire remained silent for a few moments, processing everything that was being said and, more importantly, what was being insinuated. "I cannot accept." "Ma'am," she said finally, pushing the envelope back, "not because I don't need the money. God knows it would change my family's life. But because I cannot abandon William, Marina, and Henry, as all the other adults they trusted have done. They deserve more than that." Mrs. Beatrice's eyes hardened. "You're making a mistake. This world isn't for people like you, Claire. Sooner or later, reality will come to light, and it will be much more painful for everyone." "Perhaps," Claire replied, standing up. "But it will be my choice to face that pain when it comes, not to run from it now." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. Mrs. Beatrice's words echoed in her mind, mixing with confused thoughts about Richard and the children. As much as she tried to deny it, she knew something was growing between her and Richard, something silent and undeclared, but real. She also knew that Mrs. Beatrice was partially right. Their worlds were too different. What could she offer a man like Richard Allister, besides complications? And the children. What would happen to them if everything went wrong? If she and Richard tried something and it didn't work out? It would be 3 more broken hearts under her responsibility. The next morning brought a painful decision, but one Claire believed was correct. After the children's breakfast, she sought Richard in his office. "I need to speak with you, sir," she said formally. Richard, sensing her tone, indicated for her to sit. "What's wrong, Claire? Is it about my mother?" "I know she can be difficult, but—" "It's not about your mother," Claire interrupted. "Or perhaps it is indirectly. I received news from my family. My mother, her condition has worsened. I need to return to Savannah immediately." Richard paled. "I understand, but surely we can arrange for you to visit your mother and then return. I can provide tickets, accommodations, whatever is necessary." Claire avoided his gaze. "It's not a temporary visit. I need to be there permanently. My sister can no longer care for her alone." Claire, Richard stood up, approaching her. I know something else is happening. Was it something my mother said or did? Because if it was, I can... Please, Claire pleaded, finally finding the courage to face him. Don't make this more difficult. It's painful enough already. The children, Richard argued. They'll be devastated. You've been everything to them. And that's why I need to go now before they get even more attached, Claire replied, her voice trembling. You're reconnecting. Continue the work we started. They need their father more than they need me. Richard seemed to want to say something more, but he restrained himself. When do you plan to leave? Tonight, if possible. I've already packed my things. The look of pain on Richard's face almost made her reconsider, but Claire remained firm in her decision. She knew that sooner or later, the social chasm between them would become a bigger problem than any nascent feelings. Saying goodbye to the children was the hardest part. Claire decided not to tell the whole truth. She only said her mother was ill and needed her. Henry cried openly, clinging to her as if he could physically prevent her from leaving. Marina, always more restrained, shed only a few silent tears, but her eyes communicated a sense of betrayal that broke Claire's heart. William was the most devastating. He didn't cry, didn't beg. He simply looked at her with an empty expression that Claire immediately recognized, the same expression he had when she first arrived at the mansion. The walls were back, taller and thicker than ever. You've been the best thing that ever happened in my life, Claire said, hugging the three of them one last time. And I'll always be with you even when far away. Mrs. Beatrice watched the scene from the stairs with an impassive expression. When Claire finally pulled away from the children and picked up her suitcase, the matriarch approached. You made the right choice, she said in a low voice. For everyone involved. Claire didn't answer. She didn't trust herself to speak at that moment. Richard insisted on driving her personally to the bus station, despite her protests that a taxi would suffice. The journey was made in heavy silence, laden with unsaid words and suppressed feelings. At the bus station, when it was finally time to say goodbye, Richard held her hands. I don't believe it's just because of your mother, he said softly. But I respect your decision. I just want you to know that you've changed our lives, Claire. You've changed my life, and our door will always be open if you ever want to come back. Claire allowed herself a moment of weakness, lightly squeezing his hands before letting go. Take good care of them, Richard, and of yourself too. With those words, she turned and walked towards the bus that would take her back to Savannah, leaving behind not only the Alastair mansion, but a part of her heart that she knew she would never fully recover. The month following Claire's departure was one of the darkest in the Alastair mansion. The children, who had begun to flourish under her care, retreated back into their protective shells. Henry cried silently at night. Marina refused to visit the secret garden they had created together, and William returned to his rebellious posture, even being suspended from school after a confrontation with a classmate. Richard desperately tried to keep alive the connection he had begun to build with his children. He diligently followed all the routines Claire had implemented, striving to be present at meals and important moments, but he felt like an imposter. Claire's absence was a constant presence among them, an invisible ghost no one mentioned, but everyone felt. Mrs. Beatrice remained at the mansion after Claire's departure, supposedly to help with the transition. Richard suspected she was actually overseeing to ensure Claire didn't return or maintain contact, which fueled his silent resentment against his mother. We need to hire a new nanny, Mrs. Beatrice insisted during breakfast. I can make some calls. I know excellent families with well-mannered daughters who would be willing to take the position. Richard watched his coffee, avoiding his mother's gaze. I don't want another nanny right now. The children aren't ready. And you, Richard? Are you ready? Mrs. Beatrice provoked, her eyes assessing him carefully. Richard finally looked up. What do you mean by that? You know exactly what I mean, she replied, gently putting down her cup. I'm worried about you, son. Ever since that young woman left, you've been acting as if you've lost something personal, too. I have, Richard admitted finally. I lost the person who managed to bring my children back to life. Who taught me to be a father again? Is that what you're telling yourself? Mrs. Beatrice asked with a sigh. Richard, you've always been a smart man in business, but naive in matters of the heart. That young woman wasn't what she seemed. Richard frowned. What do you mean? Mrs. Beatrice hesitated, as if considering her next words carefully. Let's just say I have sources that suggest the story about the sick mother may not be entirely true. Before Richard could question further, they were interrupted by Helen, who hurried into the dining room. Mr. Richard, there's a call for you. It's from William's school. It sounds urgent. The conversation with the school principal was brief but alarming. William had been involved in another fight, this time more serious. The school was considering a temporary expulsion and demanded Richard's immediate presence. Upon arriving at the institution, one of New York City's most prestigious, Richard found his son sitting on a chair outside the principal's office, his face closed in an expression that mixed anger and shame. "What happened, William?" he asked, sitting next to his son. "I don't want to talk about it," the boy mumbled, avoiding his gaze. "You'll have to talk," Richard insisted, keeping his voice calm. "I'm trying to understand, son. I want to help." "How did you help Claire?" William shot back, finally looking at his father. "By letting her leave like Mom." The question hit Richard like a physical blow. "It wasn't like that. Then how was it? Because she was fine, she was happy with us, and then suddenly she had to leave. Just like Mom, just like everyone." Before Richard could respond, the principal's office door opened, revealing the stern figure of Dr. Foster, a woman in her 50s with a rigid posture and keen eyes. "Mr. Alistair, please come in." The meeting was tense. The principal explained that William had physically assaulted a classmate after the latter made comments about broken families and mothers who abandon their children. "I understand William's family situation is complex," Dr. Foster mused, adjusting her glasses, "and we are aware of the recent staff changes in your home. However, violence is never acceptable." "I agree completely," Richard replied. "William will be properly punished at home and will apologize to his classmate." "There's something else, Mr. Alistair," the principal continued, her tone becoming even more serious. "We received an anonymous letter expressing concern for the emotional well-being of your children. Normally, we wouldn't pay attention to anonymous communications, but considering William's recent behaviors and the changes Marina has also shown in class," Richard felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of letter?" "A letter suggesting that your children may be suffering emotional neglect," she replied directly. "As an institution, we are obliged to take any such allegation seriously. We would prefer to resolve this internally, but if we don't see improvements, we will be forced to notify Child Protective Services." Richard's world seemed to crumble as he drove back home with a silent William beside him. The implicit threat from the principal hung over him like a dark cloud. Could he really lose his children? Upon arriving at the mansion, they found a visibly agitated Helen waiting in the entrance hall. "What is it, Helen?" Richard asked, feeling another bomb was about to drop. "It's Mrs. Beatrice, sir," the housekeeper replied. "She's having a heated discussion in the office." With Mr. Hayes, Richard froze. Stephen Hayes, Lucy's father and his children's grandfather, was a man he hadn't seen in years. Their relationship had always been tense, especially after Lucy's departure, when Stephen blamed Richard for his daughter's unhappiness. "William, please go to your room," Richard instructed. The boy seemed to want to protest, but something in his father's expression made him obey silently. In the office, Richard found his mother and his former father-in-law in a tense confrontation. Stephen Hayes, a 70-year-old man with an aristocratic bearing similar to Mrs. Beatrice's, turned immediately upon seeing him enter. "Finally," Stephen said with disdain, "the man who can't even keep a nanny to properly care for my grandchildren." "What are you doing here, Stephen?" Richard asked, keeping his voice controlled despite his rising anger. "I came to inform you that I am filing for custody of my grandchildren," Stephen announced. "I've been observing from afar how this family has been run since my daughter left, and what I see deeply concerns me." Richard felt his blood run cold. "You don't have that right." "Yes, I do," Stephen retorted, "especially when there's evidence of emotional instability and neglect. William's school contacted me about his behavioral problems, and I have reliable reports about the high turnover of staff in this house, the last one being particularly traumatic for the children." Richard shot an accusing glance at his mother, who seemed genuinely surprised. "It wasn't me, Richard," she defended herself. "I would never involve outsiders in family matters." It doesn't matter who it was, Stephen intervened. The fact is, my grandchildren are suffering, and as their grandfather, I have a duty to protect them. Protect them? Richard almost laughed. Where have you been for the past 5 years, Stephen? Since Lucy decided Europe was more important than her children, how many times have you visited? How many birthdays did you remember? Don't come to me with this hypocrisy now. Blame me all you want, Stephen replied coldly. But the courts won't care about the past. They'll focus on the present, on the current ability to provide a stable environment. And with your workload, your constant travels, and now these incidents, I'm not confident in your chances. After Stephen left, leaving behind copies of legal documents already filed, Richard collapsed into a chair, feeling completely defeated. He can't do that, Mrs. Beatrice said, her voice devoid of its usual confidence. He can't simply take the children from you. Richard looked at his mother, a mix of anger and despair in his eyes. Why not? Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm a terrible father. I couldn't keep Lucy interested in our family. I couldn't connect with my own children without help, and now... His voice trailed off. Now I don't even know how to help them deal with another abandonment. Richard, Mrs. Beatrice began hesitantly. About Claire. No, he interrupted firmly. I don't want to hear any more insinuations or conspiracy theories. Claire did more for this family in a few months than any of us managed in years. If she had to leave to take care of her mother, it was because she truly needed to. Mrs. Beatrice sat down slowly, an unusual expression of vulnerability on her usually composed face. My son, there's something I need to tell you. The tone of her voice made Richard pay attention. Claire didn't leave just because of her mother, Mrs. Beatrice confessed, avoiding his gaze. I offered her money to leave. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Richard stared at his mother, stunned, as if he couldn't fully comprehend what he had just heard. You did what? It was for your own good, Mrs. Beatrice defended herself. For the children's good. You were getting emotionally involved with an employee, Richard. Think of the scandal, the family's exposure. The scandal? Richard stood up abruptly, his voice rising for the first time. Is that what worries you, Mother? What your friends will think? What they'll say at your charity events? Meanwhile, my children are suffering. I am suffering. Richard, be reasonable. You are an Alistair. You have responsibilities that go beyond your personal desires. Your social position. To hell with my social position, Richard exclaimed, surprising both his mother and himself with the outburst. He had never spoken to Mrs. Beatrice like that before. What good is all this, the money, the name, the status, if I can't be happy? If my children can't be happy? Mrs. Beatrice seemed to have aged 10 years in those few minutes. I always tried to protect you, son. Ever since your father left, I carried the burden of keeping this family respectable, of ensuring you had every opportunity. At the cost of my happiness, Richard completed bitterly. At the cost of my ability to love openly, to show emotions, to be human. That's why I failed as a husband. That's why I'm failing as a father. Because I learned from you that appearances matter more than feelings. Tears, something Richard had never seen before, began to stream down his mother's wrinkled face. I didn't know how to do it differently, she confessed, her voice almost a whisper. I was never taught to love, Richard, only to keep up appearances. The sincere confession partially diminished Richard's anger. He sat down again, exhausted. What did Claire say when you offered her the money? Mrs. Beatrice discreetly wiped her tears. She refused. She said she couldn't abandon the children as all the other adults had done. It was only later, when she realized how complicated the situation was becoming, that she decided to leave. Richard closed his eyes, feeling a sharp pain in his chest as he imagined Claire confronting his mother, defending her commitment to the children. That was exactly the kind of person she was, loyal, courageous, principled, and he had let her go. A sudden thought made him open his eyes. The anonymous letter to the school, Stephen's convenient visit now. Mother, do you know anything about this? Mrs. Beatrice seemed genuinely confused. No, Richard. I would never do anything that could harm the children or risk them being taken from you. Richard believed her, which meant someone else was trying to manipulate the situation. Someone with access to information about the family, about the school, about Claire's recent departure. I need the full truth, Mother, he said, his mind working quickly. When Claire decided to leave, did she really mention her mother was worse, or was that something you presumed? Mrs. Beatrice reflected for a moment. She said she needed to go back to take care of her mother. I assumed she had worsened, but she didn't go into detail. A spark of hope ignited in Richard's chest. What if Claire's mother's situation hadn't actually worsened? What if she had used that only as an excuse to leave, believing she was protecting the Alistair family from social complications? At that moment, he made a decision he should have made weeks ago. "Mother, I'm going to get Claire," he announced, standing up with renewed determination. "And when I return, I hope you will have reflected deeply on your actions and are ready to apologize not only to her, but to the children for driving away someone they loved." "Richard, be reasonable," Mrs. Beatrice protested, though with less conviction than usual. "Even if you find her, how can you be sure she'll come back, that she'll accept facing all the social prejudice that will surely come?" Richard stopped at the door, turning to his mother with an expression that mixed determination and vulnerability. "I can't be sure," he admitted, "but I learned from Claire that some things are worth the risk. My children deserve for me to fight for them, for their happiness. And he hesitated briefly, "I deserve a chance to find out if what I felt, what I still feel, is real." As Richard left the office, Mrs. Beatrice remained seated, lost in thought. For the first time in many years, the carefully constructed walls around her began to show cracks, allowing long-suppressed emotions to emerge. In the small house she had rented in Savannah, Claire Oliver watched the rain from the window, thinking about the children and Richard. The weeks since her departure had been marked by a melancholy that not even the comforting presence of her mother and sister could dispel. The money she had saved working at the Alistair mansion had allowed them to hire a better doctor for her mother, but it was still not enough for the full treatment she needed. Claire had found a job at a local school, but the salary was only a fraction of what she received in New York City. That night, she knelt beside her bed as she did every night, closed her eyes, and silently prayed for the 3 hearts she had left behind in the Upper East Side mansion, hoping they were finding some form of healing. Even without her presence, the small private plane landed at Savannah Airport under a gentle drizzle. Richard Alistair adjusted Henry in his arms, the boy asleep after the journey. Beside him, Marina and William looked out the window with a mix of excitement and apprehension. None of them had been to the South before. "It's very different from New York City," Marina commented, observing the landscape that stretched beyond the airport runways. "Different, but equally special," Richard replied, exchanging a meaningful glance with Mrs. Beatrice, who sat silently across the aisle. The decision to bring the children and his mother had been impulsive, but Richard didn't regret it. If he was truly going after Claire, wanting to rebuild not just a professional team but potentially a family, the children needed to be part of that moment. And as for Mrs. Beatrice, well, she had a lot to atone for. "How are we going to find her?" William asked, his voice betraying the anxiety he tried to hide under an appearance of indifference. "Savannah isn't that small." "I have the address," Richard replied. Helen got it through the agency that hired Claire. As the waiting driver loaded the luggage into the rented van, Richard reflected on the events that had brought them there. After Mrs. Beatrice's revelation and Stephen Hayes's threat of custody for the children, he had spent days organizing his legal defense, ensuring all documents and arguments were ready should the process proceed. But during that time, he couldn't get Claire out of his mind. The way she had touched his children's lives, how she had unintentionally shown him the kind of man, the kind of father he could be. It wasn't just gratitude he felt. It was something deeper, truer than anything he had experienced before. The drive to the address provided by Helen took about 30 minutes. As they entered the simpler neighborhoods of the city, the contrast with the luxury they were accustomed to became increasingly evident. Richard observed how Mrs. Beatrice looked out the window with an expression that oscillated between discomfort and genuine curiosity. "It's here," the driver announced, stopping in front of a small house with light blue walls and a modest but well-kept garden. Richard felt his heart race as he got out of the vehicle, helping Henry, who had woken up, to do the same. The children immediately approached him as if seeking security. "What if she doesn't want to see us?" Marina whispered, vocalizing the fear they all shared. "Then we'll respect her decision," Richard replied, although the thought made his chest ache. But we can't give up without trying. With Henry holding his right hand tightly, Marina by his left side, and William a few steps ahead, feigning courage, Richard walked to the gate. Mrs. Beatrice remained a few steps behind, her usual haughty demeanor replaced by an almost submissive posture. Before they could knock, the house door opened, and a young woman who looked slightly like Claire appeared. Her eyes widened at the sight of the unusual group at her door. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. "We're looking for Claire Oliver," Richard replied, his voice firmer than he felt. "My name is Richard Alistair, and these are my children." The young woman's expression changed to recognition. "You're the family from New York City," she said, more a statement than a question. "Claire talked a lot about you, especially the children. Is she here?" Henry asked anxiously, stepping forward. "We miss her very much." The young woman, whom Richard presumed to be Claire's sister, hesitated. "She's not home right now. She's at church." "Church?" Richard repeated, feeling a mix of disappointment and hope. At least they were in the right city and Claire wasn't far. "St. Francis Church," she explained. "It's a few blocks from here. Claire goes there every afternoon to pray." The young woman looked at the children with sympathy. "She prays for you every day." William, who until then had maintained his defensive posture, seemed shaken by this information. "She didn't forget us?" Claire's sister smiled gently. "Forget? She talks about nothing else. Your pictures are all over her room." Richard felt a knot in his throat. "Could you give us directions to the church?" Minutes later they were back in the van, following directions to St. Francis Church. It was a modest but beautiful building, with a white facade and blue details that harmonized with the sky that was beginning to clear after the rain. "Wait here," Richard asked the children and his mother when they stopped in front of the church. "Let me talk to her first." "But we want to see Claire," Henry protested. "And you will," Richard assured. "I just need a few minutes alone with her first." Reluctantly, the children agreed. Richard walked to the church entrance, his heart pounding against his chest. He had never been a particularly religious man, attending services only on social occasions or important holidays. There was something intimidating about entering a space of devotion with such personal purposes. The interior of the church was almost empty at that hour. A few scattered worshippers were in the pews, and the light filtered through the stained glass windows created colorful patterns on the stone floor. Richard scanned the environment, his eyes eventually finding a familiar figure kneeling in one of the front pews. Claire. For a moment he just watched her. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore a light blue dress Richard had never seen before. There was something profoundly serene in her posture, in her profile illuminated by the light from the stained glass. Walking silently, Richard approached and knelt in the pew beside her. Claire, absorbed in her prayer, didn't immediately notice his presence. When she finally turned and their eyes met, the surprise on her face was absolute. "Richard?" she whispered, as if she couldn't believe what she saw. "What? How? I came to get you," he replied simply, his voice low, respecting the sacred environment. "The children need you." "I need you." Claire blinked several times as if trying to assimilate the words. "But your mother. The situation. My mother is outside with the children," Richard explained. "She told me everything, Claire. About the money she offered, about how she tried to drive you away." The confession seemed to deeply shake Claire. "It wasn't just because of that I left, Richard," she admitted. "It was because I saw what was happening between us, and I was afraid. Afraid it wouldn't work out, that the children would suffer more in the end, that your world would end up rejecting us." "And your mother?" Richard asked gently. "Did she really get worse?" Claire lowered her eyes. "Not exactly. She needs continuous care, but she wasn't worse than when I left Savannah. I used that as an excuse because it seemed more noble than admitting I was running away." Richard took her hands in his. "Claire, something is happening in New York City. Stephen Hayes, Lucy's father, is trying to get custody of the children. He claims I'm emotionally unavailable, that the house is unstable." Claire's eyes widened, instinctively squeezing his hands. "He can't do that. The children belong with you." "They belong with us," Richard corrected, surprising her. "Claire, ever since you left, I realized something I may have always known but never had the courage to admit. You are not just the best person to care for my children. You are the person I want to build a life with, Claire felt tears forming in her eyes. "Richard, our worlds are so different." "So what?" he questioned. "The world I lived in my whole life gave me wealth and status, but it didn't teach me to love, to be a father, to be truly happy. It was you, with your wisdom and your heart, who showed me what really matters." At that moment, the sound of hurried footsteps broke the silence of the church. Before they could react, Henry came running down the central aisle, closely followed by Marina and William. "Claire!" Henry shouted, completely ignoring the reverence the place required. He launched himself into her arms with such force that he almost knocked her off the pew. Claire couldn't hold back her tears as she hugged the little one, soon being embraced also by Marina, who joined the hug with silent tears streaming down her face. William remained a few steps away, but his eyes, usually so hard, now overflowed with contained emotion. "Are you coming back home with us?" Marina asked, her voice trembling. "Please say yes." Claire looked at Richard, then at the children, then beyond them, where Mrs. Beatrice stood at the church entrance, her rigid posture contrasting with the evident emotion on her aged face. "There's a lot to discuss," Claire said finally. "My mother needs care. My life is here now." "We can bring your mother to New York City," Richard suggested immediately. "Offer the best medical treatment available. Your sister too, if she wants." "I'm not asking you to abandon your family, Claire. I'm asking you to allow our families to become one." William finally approached, stopping directly in front of Claire. His eyes, so similar to his father's, stared at her with intensity. "You said some people need to go through difficult transformations before they become more beautiful and free," he reminded her, referring to the butterfly analogy she had shared in the secret garden. "I think we all went through that while you were away. Now it's time to come out of the cocoon." The wisdom in the boy's words touched Claire deeply. She looked at each of them, Richard with hope and love in his eyes, Henry still clinging to her waist, Marina with tears of joy, and William finally allowing himself to be vulnerable. Her gaze then met Mrs. Beatrice, who slowly approached. The Alastair matriarch seemed to have aged years in just a few weeks. When she reached the group, she did something no one expected. She knelt with difficulty in front of Claire. "I've made many mistakes in my life," Mrs. Beatrice said, her voice trembling with emotion, "but none as serious as trying to separate this family you helped build. I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately, just to give my son and my grandchildren the chance they deserve, the chance that I, with my pride, almost destroyed." Claire, deeply moved by the gesture, leaned forward and gently helped the elderly woman to her feet. "Forgiveness is not something you grant once, Mrs. Beatrice. It's a daily choice. I'm willing to make that choice if you are too." The elder woman nodded, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. Turning back to Richard, Claire took a deep breath. "I can't promise it will be easy. There will be challenges, prejudices, obstacles. We'll face them together," he assured, "every single one of them." "Then yes," Claire said finally, a smile illuminating her face. "Yes, I'll come back home with you." The journey back to New York City was marked by renewed energy. Claire had agreed to return, on the condition that her mother and sister could accompany her. Richard, eager to begin this new phase, quickly organized everything, ensuring that Mrs. Oliver's medical transfer was done with all possible comfort. The arrival of the Oliver family at the Alastair mansion was a moment of transformation. Helen, emotional, had prepared special rooms for Claire's mother and sister. The children, excited, showed every corner of the property to the new family members. But the real battle was just beginning. As Richard had predicted, Stephen Hayes's petition to gain custody of the children moved forward in the judicial system. The main argument was that the Alastair home offered an emotionally unstable environment with transient staff and an often absent father. It was Claire who suggested a different defense strategy. Instead of hiring the most expensive lawyers to combat the allegations with legal technicalities, she proposed that they allow a full assessment of the family dynamic. "Let them see the truth," she argued. "Not the version Stephen is painting, but what we've truly built here." And so it was done. A court-appointed psychologist spent a week at the mansion, observing the interactions between Richard, Claire, and the children. She witnessed the family dinners, now a sacred tradition, observed the bedtime reading sessions, participated in afternoons in the secret garden, which now flourished more vigorously than ever. Most surprising to everyone was Mrs. Beatrice's transformation. The once rigid matriarch now sat patiently as Henry taught her to play video games, or listened with genuine interest to the stories Claire's mother told about life in rural Georgia. When the day of the decisive hearing arrived, the Alastair family entered the courtroom united. Claire, still without an official family status beyond Nanny, stood beside Richard as his equal, his partner, his strength. Stephen Hayes presented his case with cold eloquence, bringing reports about William's behavioral problems at school and testimonies from former employees about Richard's supposed emotional detachment as a father. But then it was the defense's turn. The court psychologist presented a detailed report on the positive changes observed in the family dynamic. The children themselves spoke one by one, expressing their desire to remain with their father and with Claire. William, in particular, surprised everyone with his emotional eloquence. "Before Claire came, we were like plants without water," he told the judge. "My dad was lost. He didn't know how to reach us, and we didn't know how to reach him. Claire taught us all how to connect again. Now we are a real family. Please don't take that away from us." The most unexpected testimony, however, came from Mrs. Beatrice, the elderly lady, dressed in her usual elegance but without the arrogance that used to accompany her, looked directly at Stephen Hayes before addressing the judge. "I spent my entire life believing that appearances and status were more important than emotions," she confessed. "I taught that to my son and almost destroyed his ability to love openly. Claire Oliver saved not only my grandchildren, but all of us from this emotional prison we built. If this court truly cares about the well-being of these children, it will allow them to remain exactly where they are, in a house that has finally become a home." The judge, visibly touched by the testimonies, concluded the hearing, promising a quick decision. 3 days later, the notification arrived. Stephen Hayes's petition had been denied. The children would remain in Richard's custody. The celebration at the Alastair mansion that night was subdued, but deeply significant. The two families, Alastair and Oliver, dined together in the Grand Hall, united not by blood or social status, but by choice, by love, by overcoming. Later, when the children had already fallen asleep, Richard led Claire to the secret garden. Under the moonlight, the flowers they had planted together months before were now in full bloom, creating an almost magical setting. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the church," Richard commented, holding Claire's hands in his. "About how our worlds are different." "Richard, let me finish," he gently asked. "I realized you're right. Our worlds are different, but not in the way we thought. Your world, Claire, is made of love, of truth, of courage. Mine was made of appearances, of status, of fear. And if I had to choose which world I want to live in, I would choose yours without hesitation." Kneeling before her, Richard took a small box from his pocket. "Claire Oliver, you taught me to be a father. You taught me to be human again. Now I want to learn to be a husband, a partner, a companion. Will you marry me? Not to unite our worlds, but to create a new one, ours." Claire, looking at the man kneeling before her, so different from the distant, cold Richard she had known months before, felt tears of happiness roll down her face. "Yes," she replied simply, her heart overflowing with emotion. "Yes, I want to build that world with you." The wedding, held 3 months later, was a simple but meaningful celebration in the mansion's gardens. Claire had insisted she didn't want a grand production, and Richard had readily agreed. What mattered was not the ceremony, but the commitment they were making to each other and to the children. William, Marina, and Henry had special roles in the ceremony. It was William who handed the rings, Marina who walked Claire down the improvised aisle, and Henry who scattered flower petals from the secret garden in the bride's path. Mrs. Beatrice, alongside Claire's mother, represented the union of worlds that once seemed irreconcilable. Both women, overcoming prejudices and cultural barriers, had developed a mutual respect that surprised everyone. The tea room that Mrs. Beatrice valued so much was transformed into a children's library. The formal dining room, once used only on special occasions, became a space for games and daily gatherings. Fridays officially became family night with games, movies, and long conversations. William, once so rebellious, discovered his talent for drawing and began creating comic books about an unusual but loving family. Marina developed a passion for music, especially for the piano that lay forgotten in the living room and now came to life under her fingers. Henry, always the most expressive, became the joy of the house, his laughter echoing through the corridors that were once silent. Claire, in addition to being a wife and mother, found her professional purpose. She transformed part of the property into a community school for underprivileged children in the region. Richard fully supported the initiative, not only financially, but by personally getting involved in the projects. Mrs. Beatrice, in her journey of redemption, became a present and loving grandmother, something she never imagined herself capable of. Claire's mother, thanks to the advanced medical treatments she could now receive, saw her health improve significantly, allowing her to actively participate in the life of the unified family. A year after the wedding, during an especially quiet afternoon in the secret garden, Claire shared news that would complete the family's cycle of renewal. She was pregnant. The children's reaction was of pure joy. They would have a brother or sister to love and protect. "I never thought I could be so happy," Richard confessed as he hugged Claire. Observing the children excitedly plan the baby's room. "I always believed that success lay in achievements, in numbers, in recognition." "And what do you think now?" Claire asked, snuggling into his arms. Richard looked around, for the garden they had cultivated together, for the children who finally knew the meaning of family, for the woman who had transformed his life with love and courage. "Now I know that true success is here," he replied, placing his hand over his heart. "It's in loving without fear, in being loved despite flaws, in building something that transcends social status or material wealth." Claire smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "You know what impresses me most? How it all started with a simple act, joining 3 children's beds who needed to feel they weren't alone." Sometimes, Richard reflected, it's the simplest gestures that trigger the greatest transformations. As the sun set over the secret garden, bathing the family in a golden light, Claire thought of all the circumstances that had brought them there. The pains, the separations, the fears, the discoveries. Each element, even the most painful ones, had been necessary to weave this story. The mansion that was once cold and silent now overflowed with life, with laughter, with music. The walls that once witnessed loneliness now echoed with animated conversations, passionate discussions, declarations of love. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth Claire had taught them all. True love is not built with luxury or status, but with presence, with courage, with the willingness to see beyond appearances. Looking at Richard and the children, Claire knew they had created something rare and precious, not just a family, but a home where everyone could be authentically themselves, where love was not conditional on perfection, where forgiveness was practiced daily. The baby growing inside her would be welcomed into this new world they had built together, a world where differences did not separate but enriched, where the past did not determine the future, where every dawn brought the promise of another day to love, learn and grow together. It was, in the end, the greatest wealth Richard Alistair could ever have imagined, a heart finally free to love without reservations, children flourishing in fertile ground of acceptance, and a companion who saw not only who he was, but who he could become. And all because one day, a man too busy with numbers and meetings decided to come home early and witness the miracle a simple southern nanny had performed in his family. Sometimes, the greatest transformations begin in the most unexpected moments, and sometimes the truest love is born in the most unlikely places. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Richard and Claire's journey has touched your hearts. To continue navigating equally emotional stories, we have prepared a special playlist that you can find by clicking on the left side of the screen. If this narrative of love and overcoming has warmed your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave your like and share your thoughts in the comments. Every day we bring new stories that explore the complexities of love and family. Your presence in the comments inspires us to continue telling stories that move and transform. Until next time.